Greetings, everybody. I'm Larry Williams, Director of CARMA, the Consortium for the Advancement of Research Methods and Analysis in the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. It is October the 3rd, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to a very special event. And today, CARMA is honored to be hosting a webcast lecture by a distinguished visitor from Virginia Tech University. It's being offered as part of the ISQS Research Seminar Series. If you're new to CARMA, let me tell you briefly that we are a research center in the Rawls College of Business at Texas Tech University. And our mission is to provide research methods education for faculty and doctoral students to aid them do the highest possible quality scholarly research. You may know that we have been in existence since 1997. We have three main things that we do. We do a series of webcast lectures each year that we stream live. We have 14 of them scheduled. We've had two, and we've got a couple more coming up in a couple of weeks. We also have some special webcast lectures like this one. All of those events, all of those live lectures and this one, the recordings go in our CARMA video library. And so since we have been doing this since 2004, we have over 250 one-hour lecture recordings on a variety of qualitative and quantitative, introductory and advanced research methods topics, and all that are available on demand at no charge to our members. We have an institutional membership model. Institutions pay a fee to join CARMA, and once they pay that fee, then their faculty and students get that unlimited access. In addition, we have different panel series that we run. We have one set of panels that are specifically for PhD, doctoral students that focus on topics that are important to them as they're pursuing their graduate training. We refer to those quite creatively as our PhD prep panels. And then we also have a series of Ask the Expert panels that we do during the course of the year. And then finally, we also throughout the year do a variety of different types of short courses, online short courses and workshops. We have just announced a series of 12 short courses for January that you should be able to find information on our homepage, as well as a workshop series that we'll be doing in November. So there's a lot that we have to offer, and let me invite you to visit our webpage, karmattu.com. So now it's my real pleasure to introduce the person who's going to introduce our guest speaker. And it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Fred Davis. Fred is the Paul Whitfield Horn Professor in the Rawls College of Business and the Bobby G. Stevenson Chair in IT. And he has a special relationship with our presenter today. And so I will turn it over to him. Fred?
Thank you very much, Larry. We sure do appreciate CARMA. It's an excellent resource for keeping up with the latest and greatest methods for research, especially in business and management. Our speaker today, Viswanath Venkatesh, is the eminent scholar, and he holds the Verizon Endowed Chair Professorship at Virginia Tech, Pamplin College of Business. Now, I've had the pleasure of knowing Venki for more years than I'm willing to admit at this point. He was my PhD student in information systems at Minnesota. He's also been a faculty colleague at Maryland and University of Arkansas before he joined Virginia Tech. His research mainly is about technology adoption, broadly defined, and he's got an amazing publication record in top business journals in IS, marketing, management, operations, as well as articles in the sister disciplines like psychology and medical informatics, for example. He's received numerous awards. That would take all day to list them. And he's earned recognition for a career citation impact, a composite citation impact score ranking him number 355 this year out of roughly 9 million scientists of all disciplines worldwide. Just amazing. Today's topic is going to share some strategies for leveraging mixed methods research, and he'll be drawing from his recent book on that topic. Thank you very much for joining us, Venky.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Larry, for inviting me to be part of the Karma series. I've been a longtime consumer, learning a lot from the various lectures on karma. And thank you, Joy, Fred, and others for having me here at Rawls for this visit. And Rhonda, thanks for your amazing organization of the trip. So today I'm going to be talking about mixed methods research and how it can be used. Particularly, my focus is going to be on what are the purposes, what are the situations in which we can use mixed methods research. So I'm going to talk briefly about the book and two of the articles that we have written in this space. Then quickly introduce the idea of mixed methods research and talk about my journey and what drew me to focus on mixed methods research. And then talk about paradigm pluralism as a key need to be able to do mixed methods research. And the main focus is really on purposes and illustrations of mixed methods research, drawing from different disciplines, management, information systems, business ethics. So really drawing from a variety of different disciplines. So to start with, the book in 2023 through Virginia Tech Publishing, we have an open access book on mixed methods research. There are, of course, a number of different sources, number of different books available on mixed methods. And the particular thing that we found as a need that this book addresses is how do you write mixed methods papers? Of course, we do address issues of how do you conduct mixed methods research, what are the situations in which you'd want to do mixed methods research, how do you go about doing it, how do you analyze, how do you mix? But importantly, one of the things as an author, as a reviewer, as an editor that I faced as a challenge was how do you structure this and disseminate the knowledge? Because when reviewers handle papers which are mixed methods papers and they don't have the broad expertise, they don't know what the paper is supposed to look like. So we wanted to particularly provide guidance around the structure and templates for mixed methods research. That's not the focus of today's talk, but that's a key part of what we have in the book. The book is structured to introduce the idea of mixed methods research and designing mixed methods research studies. So I'll be talking briefly about chapter 2, about some of the philosophical foundations, and really the need to focus on multiple paradigms, and chapter 4, which focuses on the purposes of mixed methods research. And like I mentioned, section 3 is focused on how do you make contributions, how do you write papers, and also some guidelines for reviewers and editors for mixed methods research articles. Two papers that we have in this space, particularly focused a bit more on information systems research, are one in MIS Quarterly, which are guidelines for mixed methods research, and the other in the Journal of the Association for Information Systems, expanding on some of our earlier guidelines from 2013. The book being open access should be hopefully worth a bit more than you pay for it, okay? So the next thing, just to introduce it briefly, is what is mixed methods research? Right? What does it mean? Many of you may be familiar with it, but multi-method research and mixed methods research are often used interchangeably and sometimes confused. The distinction that I want to make is that multi-method research is the use of any two methods, right? So it could be any two methods. Could be two quantitative methods, two qualitative methods, really just multiple methods. And when we say mixed methods research, we are specifically referring to mixing and using qualitative and quantitative methods, right? There must be qualitative and quantitative methods. So that's a key distinction between multi-method research, or the term multi-method research, and mixed methods research. And so when you think about multi-method research, it's any two methods. So by definition, mixed methods research is part of multi-method research, but not all multi-method research is mixed methods research. So mixed methods research requires the use of qualitative and quantitative methods. Now, for my journey that got me to mixed methods research, right? I'm going to give you two examples. The first one is when I was working in the topic of technology adoption, and this is 1,000 years ago, previous millennium stuff. I got interested in why do people adopt technologies? Why do people adopt computers in homes? Why do they, now you might think of this as like a non-issue, but at that time, people didn't have computers in homes, right? If you can think back to that time. So Sue and I, Sue Brown, who was also a PhD student at Minnesota, Sue and I started investigating this topic and thinking about how do we study this? How do we study this? Because there was really not much research on this topic. There was a lot of research on consumer behavior, but not any research really on why do people adopt technologies for use in their homes. And so what are the factors? How do we go about discovering what these factors are? So in order to achieve this goal, we conducted qualitative research, right? We conducted interviews to understand what could be the potential factors, especially departing from the technology adoption research that had been done up to that point, which was primarily focused on the employee adoption and use of technology. So one of the objectives of that work was identifying factors that determine household adoption. We have some other objectives, but to identify the factors, we embarked on qualitative research, even though in Minnesota, as part of my training and the way we looked at research was really primarily trained in quantitative methods and thinking about positivism as our way of doing science. So at that point, it was, well, I cannot do this work in a way that's high quality without really embarking on some interviews, some qualitative work as well. So this is not quite conforming to all the guidelines and the stringent standards that we might have for mixed methods research today. But this told me that, well, I need to step outside of the traditional way of just doing quantitative work, which is what I was trained to do. So we discovered a number of things that helped us identify factors that were unique to the technology adoption in households, but also some factors which came from the tradition of technology adoption research in the workplace. So we were able to create a more complete, more holistic model of the technology adoption in the household because we embarked on a mixed methods investigation, loosely speaking. So that drew me to investigate, doing more mixed methods research. Then a second example is one that we eventually published in Production and Operations Management. This started as an investigation of technology implementation in a bank in India. And how does this impact the employees? How does the implementation of a technology impact employees? So in terms of where we started, we said, okay, well, if we want to study jobs and the impact on employees, use the job characteristics model, Hackman and Oldham's job characteristics model. So we looked at what was the impact of information and communication technologies, the technology that was being implemented in the bank, using the JCM, the job characteristics model, as the lens, right? Before the implementation, it worked like the job characteristics model typically does. But after the implementation, the job characteristics model was not supported at all. The job characteristics model was not supported. What happened? Why did this happen? What is going on instead? What is driving the job outcomes? Right? Job satisfaction, job performance, what is driving it? So we had to turn again to qualitative data, to interviews that we had conducted during the course of the investigation in order to get an understanding of what was going on. And what that led us to was really a very rich understanding of the factors, and none of which was really just about the job. It was about the work environment and things that were very unique to the particular context that we were studying. And we were able to do that. We were able to write the paper. We were able to figure out what was going on, really because we had conducted interviews along the way. If we hadn't conducted interviews, all we would have been able to say is after the implementation, the job characteristics model is not supported. So because we had done the interviews and because we were able to go back to that data, and we were able to really write a strong paper explaining what happens in that particular context. So these essentially were two of the experiences that told me that whenever I'm getting into a project, I want to do it as a mixed methods research investigation because it just leads me to do better research. It just leads me to a richer understanding, a more complete understanding of the phenomenon. So this was my awakening and move to doing this kind of work. But one of the things that's really essential in order to be able to do mixed methods research is a philosophical mind shift, if you will, or at least an openness to embracing multiple paradigms. So often when we go through the experience of a PhD education and training, we have either implicitly or explicitly some philosophical underpinnings. So, like I mentioned, my training was as a positivist, as a post-positivist, maybe, right? And regardless of whether it's positivism, post-positivism, most programs have some element implicitly or explicitly of some philosophical perspective about science. So when we think about what we need to do, we're going to turn the clock back to the Greek philosophers, and I could be here all day talking about the philosophical perspectives and how our science has been influenced, whether it's induction, introspection, whether it's reasoning, whether it's the scientific method, the ideas of the scientific method which Aristotle introduced. A lot of the influences of subsequent philosophies of science, both interpretivism and positivism, can trace its roots back to 2,000 years plus ago. And so we had some very influential scholars talking about how we should approach science and what is science. The ontological assumptions, the epistemological assumptions, the methodological, the methods available to us, the axiological assumptions. So we really have a lot of work that has been done in developing these philosophies of science. And again, explicitly or implicitly, we usually have some philosophical perspective that we embrace. And the important thing about mixed methods research, in order to be able to do mixed methods research, one has to be open to multiple paradigms. One has to embrace the notion that we will be positivist when we are doing quantitative methods potentially, and we need to shift and apply and view science from an interpretivist perspective when we're doing qualitative methods, right? So that's a very important change that people need to be able to make. If it's not within yourself, at least as a team, you need to be able to appreciate and respect multiple paradigms. And of course, subsequent to that, some of the motivations for mixed methods research comes from, Campbell and Fisk, the notion of triangulation. And when Andy Van de Ven, who was also a professor for me for theory at Minnesota, when he was going through his own journey, and he would talk to us about his journey and how his journey evolved. And everybody knows the book on engaged scholarship that Andy has written, where he talked about how it's very important to be engaged in the phenomenon that you are studying in order to be able to richly understand it, no matter whether you're a positivist or an interpretivist. So just from that perspective alone, if we do engaged scholarship alone, we're really talking about the roots of mixed methods research. We're really talking about engagement in a way that we're conducting perhaps some qualitative work, something to understand the phenomenon in a richer way. And then you can pair that with quantitative methods. So that's how you get a richer understanding. So this is very important when we think about how we can successfully conduct mixed methods research. So it is important to embrace multiple paradigms, and it is important to recognize that each of those will allow us to get a richer understanding. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So now, the purposes and illustrations of these purposes. So I'm going to draw on examples that we have from different disciplines, as I mentioned, with regard to the 7 purposes that I'm going to talk about of mixed methods research, 7 purposes, and illustrating each one with a specific example. So the 7 purposes are compensation, corroboration, diversity, development, complementarity, completeness, and expansion. And I've organized them or sequenced them in what I consider to be increasing order of value in terms of mixed methods research and what it can do for your research endeavor. So I'm going to start with compensation, which is valuable, comes from the basic idea that no method is perfect. So when you add another method, what is the goal? You're trying to remedy the weakness of another method. Why do we do a survey and an experiment? Because we want to remedy the weaknesses of the experiment with the survey and vice versa. So the idea of qualitative and quantitative methods together is to use one method to remedy the weaknesses of another method. Right? If you have statistical conclusion validity as a strength in the quantitative method, we have richness as a strength in the qualitative method. So the basic idea of compensation is remedy the weakness of one type of method with another type of method. A number of examples exist when it comes to compensation as a purpose. One of these is a great paper in JBE, where they focused on US leaders, non-US leaders, and the ethical decision-making processes in strategic business units. And what they did was they did a quantitative study. There was some critical limitations, particularly related to sample size of the quantitative study. And so they did a qualitative study to address the weaknesses of the quantitative study. Purpose, compensation. The second purpose, going back to Campbell and Fisk, the idea of triangulation. Right? We conduct multiple methods, or we conduct qualitative and quantitative studies in order to confirm, corroborate what we find in one type of method with another type of method. So what it does is it adds robustness to our findings. Right? It strengthens the validity of our conclusions. So that's corroboration. One example, again, with corroboration, just like compensation, there are a number of really good examples of studies that have conducted both types of methods. One example is this paper by Brixton and ASQ, fantastic paper looking at organizational identity orientation and the antecedents, and really doing a fantastic job with the quantitative study and then using a qualitative study to really dive deeper into and also to validate the findings from the quantitative study. So they were conducted in parallel. So typically, if you're thinking about the design, there are a number of considerations that go into it. It's discussed in section 2 of our book. But there are a number of considerations. Should you conduct them in parallel or should they be conducted sequentially? If the purpose is corroboration, essentially you're trying to confirm the same set of findings in two different types of, using two different types of methods, well, you can do them in parallel. The third is diversity. And there are a number of different reasons why you might want to get different perspectives on the same phenomenon from, say, different groups, right? Different stakeholders. And sometimes it might be that, well, you're not able to get a large enough sample in one group, so you need to use a qualitative method, so you conduct interviews or focus groups. Another might be that you just are able to get only a certain type of data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. So the idea of diversity is getting multiple perspectives on the same phenomenon, getting multiple perspectives on the same phenomenon. A good example is this Information Systems Journal paper by Chang in 2006. They compared the views of IT and general management on the importance of enterprise systems. They actually conducted a qualitative study and then followed it with a quantitative study, but actually in that paper, the author had more than just the diversity as a purpose, but for the focus on diversity, getting different perspectives, right? Getting different perspectives, IT management and general management. So that's the purpose of diversity, different perspectives. And so you might use a qualitative method from one group, quantitative method in another group, or you might use the qualitative methods to get certain perspectives from both groups, and then you can use a quantitative method also to get perspectives from different groups. That's the idea of diversity. Now to what I think are the even richer purposes. Right? Identifying constructs. So if I go back to my example on studying household PC adoption, just think back to that example. We didn't know what the constructs would be driving this phenomenon, especially if you're encountering phenomena that are somewhat new, and you think that the existing theories may potentially not be adequate, then, or think about the notion of engaged scholarship. You go in, you conduct some qualitative work in order to discover something that's not already part of our established prior knowledge. It helps us identify new constructs. It helps us identify new constructs. A really very useful way of thinking about science and doing science and advancing science. So one fantastic example, an information systems research paper, which identified in an IT outsourcing relationship, it identified critical supplier obligations, and that was what they did in the qualitative study. And then in the quantitative study, they said, what are the impacts of actually fulfilling these obligations? What are the benefits of fulfilling these obligations? So the identification of the obligations was done using a qualitative study. So without the qualitative study, they may not have had an accurate set of obligations. So again, think about the developmental purpose, particularly when you're thinking about new phenomena. You're thinking about new phenomena, you can identify something that potentially does not currently exist, right? Creating a new construct. Thinking back, think about the Colquitt and Zapata Phelan paper 2007. They talk about creating a new construct as one of the highest levels of contribution that you can make, right? So the potential to create new constructs exists. Complementarity. So with complementarity as a purpose, we try to get different aspects of our investigation studied using different types of methods, right? Different aspects of a phenomenon studied using different methods. So what you see here is one of these could be investigated using qualitative method, another could be investigated using a quantitative method. So different aspects of the phenomenon studied using different types of methods. Great, a really great illustration of this complementarity as a purpose is the formation of self-evaluations and how those self-evaluations actually manifest in terms of environmentally supportive behaviors. So this is a great AMJ paper by Sonnenschein and colleagues, where they examined the evaluations, the formation of the self-evaluations using a qualitative study. And then they studied how these self-evaluations had an impact on environmental issue supportive behaviors. So that was investigated using a quantitative study. So you look at the phenomenon, it's the formation of self-evaluations and acting on those self-evaluations for issue supportive behaviors. And the formation of the self-evaluations was done using a qualitative study, and its impact was studied in a quantitative study. And so different aspects of the same phenomenon studied in using different types of methods. Completeness. Completeness is a way of using qualitative research in particular to delve into the mechanisms to understand why something is happening. After all, the purpose of, I shouldn't say purpose because purpose is very loaded here. The goal in research is try to provide, in theory, is to provide an explanation, to understand why something is going on, right? All the way back to Dubin, all the way back to Wetton. Why would something happen, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to uncover mechanisms. That's the most fruitful avenue for theoretical contribution. That's the most important way we can make a theoretical contribution. So understanding why something happens, understanding why X has an effect on Y. Pardon the positivist spin there, but understanding why something happens, right? Understanding why something happens. If you take the particular case of when something doesn't go as, say, theory predicts, as you predict, as you hypothesized, right? What do we typically do in a paper is we tend to say, well, we speculate this is what might be going on instead, right? How about instead of doing that, try to actually open the black box and try to figure out why this happened. Try to figure out why this happened. So if I go to the second illustration of the bank in India, which we tried to study using the job characteristics model, and it didn't work, instead of just saying, hey, the validity of the job characteristics model is limited when it comes to this particular context, this particular situation, right? Rather than that, we said, okay, let's go and find out what happened, right? Why didn't it work? What works instead? So that's completeness. That's completeness as a purpose, a more complete understanding of the phenomenon. A great example of this, and they specifically investigated why, this is also an AMJ paper, Stewart and colleagues, they tested the hypothesis in a quantitative study that higher status leaders have a more difficult time implementing team-based empowerment initiatives, right? This was the hypothesis. They tested it and they found support for this. And what they did in the qualitative study was actually to figure out why. Why are higher status leaders not able to implement team-based empowerment initiatives? You'd think just intuitively, well, with the higher status, you'd have more of an opportunity to be able to do this successfully. In fact, the hypothesis, though, is that higher status leaders have a more difficult time successfully implementing team-based empowerment initiatives compared to lower status leaders. So they, using the qualitative study, delved into why. And that was their planned mixed methods study. So they found support for that hypothesis and then investigated and explained why. What are the inhibitors? What inhibits? What are the constraints? What are the things that prevent higher status leaders from successfully implementing team-based empowerment? The last purpose, the seventh purpose, is expansion. The idea of expansion is to investigate, if we observe an effect, how can we effect a change? How can we act on an effect? Essentially, how can we intervene? I think there can be no better purpose for science than to say we found something, and if it's a positive thing, let's try to catalyze that. Let's try to foster that. If it's a negative thing, how can we mitigate it? Right? How can we prevent it from happening? Right? I think there's no better purpose than no better reason than to actually try to intervene. Great example of this is a paper in AMJ where they looked at social imprinting and the impact it has on social performance. And they found that it has a direct positive effect, but it has a negative indirect effect through economic productivity. It has a negative indirect effect through economic productivity. So it has social imprinting has a negative effect on economic productivity, which in turn has a positive effect on social performance. So it has a positive direct effect, which is offset by this negative indirect effect. And the goal of their qualitative work, so that's what they found in the quantitative work, the goal of their qualitative work was, how can we mitigate this negative effect? What can we do to reduce this negative effect? What can we do to reduce this negative effect? So essentially, the effect is what it is, but they're trying to figure out how they can leverage that finding, but then to say, okay, what can we do to mitigate that negative effect? So that's expansion as a purpose. So I talked about mixed methods research as being the combination of quantitative and qualitative research, and my own journey, which got me to mixed methods research. And the very important idea that we must embrace multiple paradigms. We must be paradigm pluralist if we are to successfully do mixed methods research. That's a key need. If we're not able to embrace and at least respect other ways of doing science from what we are used to doing, it would be virtually impossible to conduct mixed methods research, right? We often think about it as something that is just at the level of the method. Right? It isn't. It's much more than that. Right? It's not just something about doing methods, doing quantitative and qualitative methods. Yes, that is the case, but it really changes the way we view the world, ontological assumptions, the way we do science, epistemological assumptions, and of course, our methods. And depending on what we're doing, what our topic is, might also relate to axiology. Doesn't mean that the scientist is objective and needs to be objective. Right? So it really can relate to multiple paradigms which are potentially not consistent with each other in a sense. And the last and most important thing that we talked about is, what are the ways in which we can do mixed methods research from the perspective of the purposes? Compensation being the most basic reason why we would do mixed methods research. To remedy weaknesses. Corroboration, triangulation, confirming findings using different types of methods. Diversity, trying to get different perspectives about the same phenomenon. Then complementarity is when we are trying to get different aspects of the phenomena that we're trying to study. Developmental, where we're trying to identify constructs. Completeness, where we're trying to get a richer understanding of the phenomena, right? Especially if things don't work out the way we plan, right? Especially if we have some findings or our model doesn't work the way we expect it to work, then we particularly can use qualitative research, for instance, qualitative methods, for instance, to uncover what might be happening instead. Why didn't it work? Why didn't established theory work? And finally, expansion, which is we observe an effect and we try to ask the question, okay, what can we do about it? Right? How can we maybe foster more of it, or how can we mitigate it? So that's what I have from the perspective of mixed methods research and the 7 purposes. That I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you, Vinky. Okay, so we have some questions that have come in. Can somebody help me get to the questions? Here we go. All right. Okay. I need to get out of these. I'll let you do that. There you go. All right, there we go. Right there. That's what I need. All right. Thank you. So it's not too late to send us questions. So it looks like we've have 6 or 7, I think, that have come in from the audience. And then for the local audience, we'll get to yours as soon as we're done. So Vinky, so how can we write the research questions for mixed methods research? Can you please provide an example of a research question?
Can I say read the book?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we do have a number of illustrations on how to write the mixed methods research question. So just at the highest level, you could have a quantitative research question, a qualitative research question, and a mixed methods question as well. So you can particularly tap into where the intersection of the two methods are, For instance, if we take one of the last papers I was talking about, say, where we observe a negative effect and we want to do something to mitigate that effect, so you'd frame the research question around how can we study the impacts of the social imprinting on social performance so as to mitigate the negative effects. Right? So it could be framed around that. So depending on what topic you have, there are a number of good examples of mixed methods research questions as well.
Okay. Vinky, do we need to have hypotheses for mixed methods or only research questions?
It's again, you would do the research consistent with the methods and the philosophical perspective that you take. So if you have a hypothesized model, so you're starting with say what's going to be a quantitative study. So you're using a hypothetical deductive approach, then you would have hypotheses, right? You would have hypotheses and you would test the hypotheses. And depending on what you find, the role of the qualitative research is either on the front end if it was developmental, or it's on the back end if it was, say, you find something that's not supported and you're trying to figure out what's going on instead. So certainly you could have hypotheses for mixed methods research.
Okay. And how can we use the theoretical framework roles in mixed methods research? I'm confused about how we utilize theory in qualitative research.
Can I again say there's a chapter? there's a chapter in the book on theory and qualitative research. So one of the broader questions that this really relates to is the issue of in order to do mixed methods research, how do I train to do mixed methods research? right? Just going back, not just the philosophical perspective, but when we train, we typically train in a set of methods that follow from that philosophical perspective. So if I was a positivist, I didn't have any qualitative methods throughout the training in my PhD program, right? So a lot of people would similarly not have the training. So I'm answering a broader question really here, which is that how do you prepare? How do you do theory in qualitative research, or how do you do qualitative research at all? So I think the easiest way to begin the journey in mixed methods is to work with someone who has the other expertise. So if you are a positivist quantitative method expert, then you may want to work with somebody else who offers the qualitative research perspective, the interpretivist philosophy, and so you can work together and learn in that process, right? Otherwise, you really would need to learn qualitative research and quantitative research, both philosophically, so you understand the different ways of doing science. It's not just about the method, right? It's really different ways of doing science. So you need to be able to do both of those. So the role of theory in qualitative research would require, becoming an expert in that domain, just as it would in quantitative research methods.
Okay, so we have 3 questions that have come, and I'm going to go ahead and say them all, and then I'll pass it on. In the book, Vinky, meta inferences are highlighted as very important. Should all mixed methods research explicitly include meta inference? So that's the first question. The second one is the purpose and order of the study mandatory? So if I'm using a developmental design, does that always mean that qualitative leads to quantitative, like identifying constructs, or can qual also be developmental? Then finally, can a mixed methods paper have multiple purposes? Do more purposes contribute to a greater research impact? If you can comment on those, that'd be great.
Oh, great questions. First, with the meta inferences, it's absolutely essential. When I was mentioning that these papers are illustrations of mixed methods, some of them are actually advertised as mixed methods papers. They say, we do a parallel mixed methods investigation, and they go through the process and actually have meta inferences. But some of the others, especially when you're looking for illustrations going back 20, 30 years, they don't always follow the guidelines or the stringent standards, like I said, that we might have today. But meta inferences are an absolute requirement for mixed methods research, right? It's what do we learn? It can be something as simple as, our quantitative methods, quantitative studies confirmed what we learned, like in corroboration. But meta inferences relate to that which we can know only because we have done a qualitative and a quantitative investigation, right? Only because we have done these two methods together, we can discover that, right? So meta inference is absolutely necessary. Okay, the developmental. So the basic idea of a developmental purpose, though I specifically framed it to give you an illustration of what you can do with developmental a purpose in saying that you can identify constructs. The idea of a developmental purpose is the work that you do in the first study becomes necessary for you to do the second study, right? It becomes necessary for you to do the second study. So if your goal in the developmental purpose is not to identify constructs, but perhaps it is to identify the processes. So then you say, I have some findings, and so then the quantitative study comes first, and then in the qualitative study, you're going to uncover the processes, right? So then, of course, it can be quant followed by qual. But for the example that I gave, which was developing constructs as using developmental purpose, identify something new, certainly the quant comes after the qual because of the nature of what we're trying to do. The third question is, can a mixed methods paper have multiple purposes? Absolutely. Actually, like I mentioned with the Chang paper, 2006 Information Systems Journal paper, that paper actually has multiple purposes. So of course, the more purposes you add, the more complexity you're adding. And the other thing about the mixing, which is not explicitly stated in this question, but is that, is it just qual and quant? Do I just have two studies? No, you can have qual, quant, and you can, as you're adding purposes and as you're adding complexity to the story that you're telling, and the research investigation, you can have a number of different studies that either go in parallel or build on each other, depending on what it is. And so one of the things about the design of mixed methods research that's also addressed in section 2 of the book is, what are the important considerations that go into designing a good mixed method study? And one of those is the sequence in which you conduct the studies. And the other is, how do you set up these studies depending on the purpose that you have? The purpose that you have could also dictate the sequence in which you conduct the studies.
Okay, question is, if I'm testing a new instrument through an exploratory mixed method study, how should I handle a situation where the themes generated by the qualitative study are not supported or contradict the measurements proposed for the quantitative study? How can I minimize the trade-offs when integrating the constructs from these two different approaches?
So the situation is that what is generated in the qualitative study is not supported in the quant study. Am I reading this question correctly?
Yes.
That's a tough question. I guess you have to go back and do more research to refine the instrument. I think then that there's an indication that perhaps the instrument that was developed in the qualitative study is not quite where it needs to be. So I would say you would need to refine your instrument. It's telling you something important about the instrument, that the instrument needs to be refined. So maybe go back and do some more qualitative work. Perhaps not what you want to hear, but you might have to do more work.
Okay. Based on your experience, what are some typical challenges faced during the review process in mixed methods papers?
This is one of my favorites because both as an editor and an author, because if you have a mixed method study and the editor typically tries to find someone who is an expert in qualitative methods and another who's an expert in quantitative methods. And that almost guarantees that one reviewer is going to hate half the paper by definition, right? And this doesn't relate just to the methods. Again, it's back to the philosophical perspectives that I was talking about. So I think in the review process, that's the biggest challenge. As an author, especially, I would tell you that that's the biggest challenge, is that you need somebody on the panel who really understands mixed methods research, and you hopefully have an editor who's going to manage the process such that they're not asking someone to comment on parts of the paper that they're not familiar with. And especially if they're not familiar with qualitative methods, basically to communicate to that reviewer that, okay, just comment on the parts that you're comfortable with. And so as long as the editor has a panel that allows them to make an informed decision. The other is, of course, from a challenge perspective, there aren't that many just qualified reviewers in mixed methods. So aside from this, so they tend to be very busy. And like as an editor handling papers, I always found that it's difficult to find someone who is a mixed methods expert. So if you get a reviewer who's qual and quant, one reviewer is qual, one reviewer is quant, that problem aside, you hope that the editor can find someone who's a mixed methods expert. And some journals take reviewer nominations, so you can scour the world for those who have published mixed methods work and maybe make some recommendations in your cover letter if they're open to it. So that's probably the biggest challenge in terms of the practice. People don't know what a mixed methods paper is supposed to look like. A reviewer doesn't know what a mixed methods paper is supposed to look like. If you're doing a paper where you do a qualitative study to develop constructs, sometimes it might come as a surprise because they're not familiar with that way of developing a construct. So making sure that you are, as an author, doing some education. You don't want to sound condescending when you do it, but you're doing something where they can understand that, okay, there are different ways of developing or identifying constructs. So you're communicating that, citing the appropriate sources that allow the reviewer to go and say, oh, okay, this is a different way of developing a construct compared to what I'm familiar with. So making sure that you're, from a mixed methods perspective as an author, you are doing a little bit of education. Maybe 20 years from now, we won't have this problem and everybody would understand it. And, it's established as, something that people get trained in. But until then, I think you want to take, as an author, do some education in your paper. Maybe an appendix, maybe supplementary materials for reviewers that will be, informational.
Okay. The last question, I'm going to take the liberty of kind of framing it a little bit more broadly. This question asks about kind of the relationship between the qualitative data that one collects and an EFA. So can you talk about how that step typically occurs in mixed methods research? So a person does a qualitative study and they then want to transition to a quantitative study with a survey measurement, and they use factor analysis in that. Can you elaborate on some of the key parts of that process?
So are you talking about converting the qualitative data to quantitative data?
Yes, that's what I like to get.
Okay. Yeah. So with qualitative data, obviously there are a number of different content analysis approaches that we can use. So you quantize the data, right? So you convert them to numbers just as you would, like in our paper on household PC adoption. That was one of the things that we did. We asked people about the reasons why they were adopting technologies, and then tried to use ways of converting that data into quantitative data, right? Based on the strength of the responses, or you could use counts or frequency counts, or other ways in which you convert the qualitative data into quantitative data. So sentiment analysis is an example of how we take rich qualitative data and convert it into quantitative data. Of course, when we're going through that process, we are throwing away some of that richness. But if the goal is to do EFA or any other form of statistical analysis, you do have to turn it into numbers, right? So quantitizing would be the approach that you would use to convert the qualitative data. You do something systematic to convert the qualitative data into quantitative data, and then EFA or anything else.
Okay, as we close, I want to take this opportunity to thank a few folks. First of all, thanks to our Assistant Director, Rebecca Velez, who's been handling the technology part of it and doing her best in spite of my limited capabilities. And so thanks to Rebecca. Thanks to the ISQS department for hosting this particular speaker. And again, a reminder, you can get a lot of information about CARMA and our different programs and events on the CARMA website. And we have a YouTube channel that has a lot of free available content as well. So finally, I just ask the local audience to join me in thanking Venki for his great research presentation.